Welcome to the Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show, where we talk quality of healthcare and explore what that actually means. Let's dig into performance measurements, the EQuiPP platform, pharmacy goals, and personal goals. We will also occasionally cover topical healthcare news and maybe throw into the conversation a few of our own nerdy passions and hobbies. So turn us up. The Quality Corner Show starts now.
Hello, Quality Corner Show listeners. This is your host, Nick Dorich, and we welcome you to episode 36 of the Quality Corner Show. Last week, we talked with Jake Galdo of the Pharmacy Quality Alliance, or PQA, about their medication use quality CE. If you didn't get a chance to listen, please check out episode 35 to learn about the program and to check out the elective course elements with the program. Expanding on Jake's comments last week, I had more of a chance to review the CE since our last episode, and there really is an opportunity for everyone to learn something new about quality improvement and quality measures. Quality improvement in healthcare is applicable for everyone, but the impact will be different based on your practice setting. Please go check out the content and see how this can apply to you. Personally, I'm interested in the course for Mastering Today's Quality Landscape, which is written specifically for pharmacists like me. Now, we're going to get on to today's show, and we're going to talk about 3 new PQA measures that are now available for hosting within EQuiPP. These measures specifically are related to polypharmacy and opioids. Both of these are subjects that are important for effectively managing a patient's health and wellness, so they are good items to now have tracked for quality improvement purposes. These new polypharmacy measures are 1, polypharmacy use of multiple anticholinergic medication in older adults, and 2, Polypharmacy CNS Active Medications in adults. That CNS part there is related to central nervous system medications. Our third new measure is entitled Use of Opioids at High Dosage in Persons Without Cancer. For today's episode, rather than going through our traditional 3-question format, this episode seemed like it was a good chance for us to try something different and have multiple guests to talk about these 3 measures. So I'm bringing back 3 familiar faces or voices that I'm happy to introduce that are returning to the show. Those are PQS team members Cora Eilders, Brittany Boyd, and Zac Renfro. Let's go in order and get some initial thoughts on these measures. First, Cora, then Brittany, and then finally Zac. So for the 3 of you, welcome back to the show. Let's hear your straightforward thoughts on the importance of these measures that are now being hosted in EQuiPP.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks for having us back on the show today. Really excited to talk through each of these new measures that are now going to be available in EQuiPP, and just excited to see, the impact that the pharmacies can have on these measures. Brittany, how are you doing?
Hey, Cora. Hello, PQS Quality Podcast Corner listeners. Happy to be back on the show again today. As you said, Cora, taking a look into these measures on that high level today are just different for us, taking us a different pathway, a different target patient population that we're looking at. And so just interested to be able to give all of our listeners and our pharmacy groups just the details surrounding these measures and giving them more information on how to impact them. Zac, what about you?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me back, Nick, and happy to be here to chat with everybody about these new measures. Really excited about the opportunity for pharmacists to play a role in hopefully improving the lives of the patients we're serving. And these measures can help with that on some different areas that we haven't really focused on in terms of new measures in a long time. So just happy to be here and happy to share some information about these new measures that will be hosted. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Zac. We're going to dive into measure number 1. And Zac, I'm actually going to be kicking this one back to you, so don't get too comfortable there. For this discussion, we've tasked each one of our quality measure experts to be fully prepared to talk about one of these new measures. To get started, we're going to go with polypharmacy use of multiple anticholinergic medications in older adults. Don't try to say that too fast. You're probably good chance of tripping up on that one and having some kind of tongue-related injury. But Zac, let's go ahead and dive into this measure. Maybe you can share with us, what is the measure? how does it work, how a pharmacy can go about understanding the performance results. So I'm just going to hand this one over to you and let you share those those details.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, as you mentioned, this measure is called Polypharmacy, use of multiple anticholinergic medications in older adults. So yeah, definitely not going to try to say that too fast or multiple times in a row. It's a mouthful. Basically what this measure is, it's a measure that is part of a series of polypharmacy measures that we're going to be hosting in the EQuIPP dashboard. Next one will be one that we'll cover a little bit later on in today's session. But this measure, it works by having patients qualifying for the measure if they are over the age of 65, have more than 2 claims for the same anticholinergic medication, and in order for them to actually be counted negatively for the measure, they have to take 2 or more unique medications concurrently for at least 30 days in the time period that we're looking at. So one item to keep in mind is that not all anticholinergic medications are included in the measure. One instance that just comes to mind for me is the fact that first-generation antihistamines such as Benadryl or diphenhydramine are included just due to the increased anticholinergic effects. But then if you look at second-generation antihistamines like cetirizine or Zyrtec, they're not included. So it's going to be really dependent on the amount of anticholinergic effect that is impacting those medications. And as far as how to positively impact this measure, something to keep in mind for this, just to give a little bit more background, is the fact that some anticholinergic medication therapeutic categories that are included in this measure are select antidepressants, antimuscarinics, and antipsychotics, as well as some other others ones that are in the measures. Concurrent use of these medications could increase the risk of falls, cognitive impairment, and cardiovascular events, among other things. So we're hosting performance data for this measure to increase the awareness of adverse effects associated with these medications for older adults. And by doing so, the hope is increased education can assist in helping patients understand the importance of not taking these types of medications together. And the pharmacy team can use this outlier information in EQuIPP to work with patients and their healthcare providers to determine an action plan to help them find safe alternative treatment options that have fewer adverse events and similar efficacy.
Zach, the name of this measure was a mouthful itself, and the details are also somewhat to that same extent. One question that I have about this measure is it's really related to it being a retrospective measure, and that's somewhat similar to the measure that we have now in EQuIPP for the use of high-risk medications in the elderly, or the HRM measure that many pharmacists will be familiar with. That retrospective view can draw some confusion, or perhaps I even dare say frustration, because once a patient negatively impacts that measure, that patient's negatively impacting that measure. That can't really be changed. So this is where, Zach, I'm going to ask for your response directly. Performance for this measure seems to be important for pharmacies to understand how they perform versus other pharmacies, or how they're performing versus benchmarks. Are they having more patients with this mix of medications? Does that seem like a right assumption, or how would you best suggest a pharmacy look at this measure performance and then do something to change that measure performance?
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. And yeah, it does have some similarities with the HRM measure, the high-risk medications measure. And really the thing that I keep in mind is you're never going to be perfect. And so you can't let perfect get in the way of being good and having success. So you need to have progress. And so the whole idea really is to help reduce the number of patients that are impacted negatively with these type of medications. Really, you're going to have some folks that are going to stay on these medications because it's worked for them for years, and it's totally understandable. However, you have to also understand that at some point, when patients get older, they will also realize that the adverse effects that could occur with these medications may outweigh the benefit of taking the medication. So if the risks are outweighing the benefits, that's another reason to reassess these measures. And so that's really the role that the pharmacy can play, and they can look at taking that and running with it to say, okay, let's at least have a conversation and open that door, more so than just doing the status quo.
Your statement there about we don't want to be just running with the same thing that we're doing really hits home to me. For myself, as someone that is slowly but surely aging, I see that in real effect almost every day. I run as my exercise, but that running 4 or 5 miles a day doesn't nearly have that same physical impact in the ways that I want it to as it did maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It doesn't maybe burn as much fat. My body doesn't react that same way. And the knees are in a little bit more pain after each run. But when we're dealing with a medication like this, it's the same thing, right? Just because a patient's been on that medication for maybe a year, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, that can have a clinical impact. But as that patient continues to age, those risks or those adverse events may become more likely, and it's important to have those considerations. We want to make sure that we're reviewing it, and in some ways we want to make sure that we're identifying opportunities for de-prescribing with the older adults. So Zac, thank you for the detail on that measure. Great insight. Appreciate you for that. We're going to move on to our next measure with Brittany, and you've reviewed the Polypharmacy CNS Active Medications in older adults measure. I'm going to hand it over to you. Please go ahead and share the important details about this measure for our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for passing that along. As Zac has already mentioned, this measure is a part of a series of polypharmacy measures that are going to be hosted in the EQuIPP dashboard. So polypharmacy, central nervous system, active medications used in older adults, works in kind of a similar way. Of course, wanting to reduce the number of patients that are obviously going to be attributed to this measure, and of course wanting to bring the awareness alongside the similarities of what Zac had presented. So patients who qualify for this measure are going to be over the age of 65. They have having more than 2 claims for the same central nervous system active medication, and having concurrent use of 3 or more unique central nervous active medications. That 3 or more meds, having that, those claims actually submitted for that is what would attribute these patients to the numerator, or essentially having them recognized as being those that are negatively impacting the performance score. When we're looking at the therapeutic categories that are included, we're looking at antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and non-benzodiazepine sedatives or hypnotics, opioids, select serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and tricyclic antidepressants. So we are looking for pharmacies to positively impact this by understanding that, the central nervous system medications would include some prescription opioid cough medications, and that the concurrent use of those meds, they could increase the risk of respiratory depression in this specific age category. As you said, Nick, you get older, you start to realize that different things may impact in different ways. Not so much the knee situation with these older adults that would attribute to this measure. But since we're going to host this performance data, we really want to present the details surrounding this and allowing pharmacies to be more aware of what's happening, and also wanting to reduce the possibility of these risks taking place in this specific age category, and also other opioid-related harms, such as falls, that can occur in those older adults.
Brittany, this measure seems pretty similar in terms of the concept, but that Zac reviewed with the prior measure, but it's just looking at a different grouping, different class of medications, and you shared what are some of those risks that we're really trying to avoid. The polypharmacy aspect of it as well, I think, is important, because often with a pharmacy dispensing system, we may be limited to just seeing what is filled at our location, or with if you're working in perhaps a chain pharmacy, there may be information from other pharmacies within the chain, but there may be some limitations. Your DUR information may have some other details that the patient may have had, but it's important to always consider and have that conversation with the patients, particularly when it is an older patient, elderly patient, those being over 65. So great context for the measure. I'll ask here a similar question, just like I did for Zac. When pharmacy teams are considering this measure, and given that it is that retrospective information or review, any thoughts on how the team can best use this measure to get the maximum effect for improving patient care?
My personal suggestion of how we would help these pharmacies is really just bringing them the awareness for the performance data that we are now going to host in the EQuIPP dashboard. In knowledge that, yes, this performance would have already happened, and knowing that these pharmacies would have already had these patients attributed, having the knowledge moving forward is what I believe is really going to be the best benefactor for our pharmacy groups that are going to utilize this performance information. As Zac has already said, that, having this information and knowing how to better assist these patients, better quality of life, being able to just assist them moving forward, and just knowing that, hey, these are the potential risks and the different things that could happen if we continue to allow these specific, eligible patients to continue to take these medications in this way. So not something that they could immediately do to affect the performance measure, but of course, being able to have the knowledge assisted in the future is really what the best part of having this measure is.
Excellent. We've now covered both of the new polypharmacy measures that are in EQuIPP. We'll move on to our third new measure in EQuIPP, which, as we stated earlier, is related to opioid use. Cora, you're the third and final guest for us today. Please go ahead, take this one away, and share with us about this new measure.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And here we are kind of bringing up the tail end with this third new measure that is going to hit EQuIPP this month. It's a little bit different than the two prior measures that we have discussed today. This one comes from the PQA opioid core measure set and is entitled Use of Opioids at High Dosage in Persons Without Cancer. Again, another measure that is quite the mouthful, so we will kind of refer this one to this measure as OHD. This one was initially endorsed by PQA actually back in 2015 and was part of the Medicaid adult core set since 2016, but kind of having an uptick, and now it's going to be added to the Medicare Part D STARS display page for 21 and 22. So kind of gaining some importance within the Medicare Part D space as well. So how does it work? This measure looks to understand the percentage of adult patients, adults considering 18 years or older, that have received more than 2 prescriptions for a high-dose opioid, which equates to a day supply of more than 15 days. So high-dose opioid for this measure is determined to be an average daily dosage of greater than or equal to 90 morphine milligram equivalents, and that's for a period of 90 or more days. This measure does have a few exclusions. So it excludes hospice patients, those diagnosed with cancer, that is kind of called out in the title, and patients diagnosed with sickle cell disease. So overall, just to kind of recap, this measure operates kind of as a numerator over denominator percentage, with the total population being your eligible patients that have more than 2 claims for an opioid that have a day supply of greater than or equal to 15 days. And then we're really calculating from that the percentage of patients who have that daily dosage of greater than or equal to 90 morphine milligram equivalents. In the dashboard, when you are looking at this measure in EQuIPP, a lower score indicates better performance. So how do you positively impact this measure? The opioids are a key part of pain management treatment, and we've seen recently how the overprescribing of opioids can play a detrimental role in our population health. So this measure does provide additional awareness to those patients who may be at a higher risk for potential opioid addiction. And perhaps pharmacists can have, a discussion with their patients who are the outliers in this measure to determine if that opioid is the best course of treatment, or perhaps, some pharmacists may have the ability to dispense naloxone to any patients that are on high-dose opioids at the point of when that patient picks up that medication. Another item I did want to call out was just the timeliness of this measure. At the time that we're recording this, we're kind of in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic, and prior to this pandemic, our country was really facing the opioid epidemic head on. And so, while our medical resources have been, focused elsewhere, it's still key that we do focus our attention on combating that opioid epidemic and just keeping the patient's best interest in mind. So some of the key things that do help keep us safe from COVID, like social distancing, and quarantine, and even some of those financial hardships that people are now facing due to the pandemic may be contributing factors to a potential misuse of an opioid. So it's always great to keep those things in mind and have a really holistic conversation with a patient if they are on a high-dose opioid.
Cora, thanks for covering the measure and, in addition, providing some context on why this type of measure is important to consider here and now. One item that I would like to point out here for the opioid measure, but really for all 3 measures that we've reviewed today, is that the measures are based on clinical guidelines that are available. Guidelines may be updated from time to time, and that can also have an impact on changes to the measures in the future. My point here is that it's important for pharmacists and pharmacy teams to understand with the new measures how it's being measured or what's being measured, how they can follow up, understanding that some of the specific guidelines, some of the specific numbers that may change, don't focus so much on those numbers specifically. That can change as more information and details made available. Understand the measure, understand how you can positively impact the measure and be actionable with it. Those are really the key points. And with that as well, remember that treating each patient is based on their subjective and objective information that you as a pharmacist, as a member of their care team, that you're reviewing. Cora, as we close out and not specifically related to the opioid measure, but all three measures that we reviewed today, can you add any additional perspective with the intent for these new measures in EQuIPP? Why some managed care plans or health plans may be interested in hosting these measures, and really what pharmacies can do to impact patient care?
Yeah, great question, Nick. And I think the overall intent, as is with any and all measures that we host, is medication safety and patient health outcomes. So coming from the perspective of a health plan, most plans host these measures to align with some of the quality requirements and reporting requirements that they have internally, but also out of just the hope to provide excellent care to their members or your patients. Some of these measures, specifically talking about the OHD measure, does also align with some legislation that has been passed at the federal level, but also maybe at the state level as well. So if you're looking at the federal level, the Support Act really outlines some key points that look to enhance our medical industry to take care of those that are in that opioid epidemic. And so looking forward as to what plans are likely to host these measures, really for the polypharmacy measures, I would expect, many of those Medicare Part D plans would be interested in this measure, and then, pharmacies that are serving those Medicare members would be able to see this data and have an impact on that data. When looking at the OHD or opioid measure, really across the board, it may be some managed care Medicaid may have some state requirements for reporting on this measure. But definitely with the Support Act, you're going to see, Medicare plans pick up this measure and host it within EQuIPP as well.
Important context for us all to consider. Thanks, Cora. The quality improvement process is an important element for healthcare. We can't lose sight of that. Each one of us as a provider or as a part of the healthcare system must have a commitment to quality improvement, and that inherently includes having a process to measure those results. So we cannot and should not make ourselves entirely dependent upon those performance results. We must always be thinking about the patients. It is a fine balance between the patient care aspect, the performance results that we're looking at, and just like everything and anything in this world, an extreme response can be unwarranted. We need to find that happy middle to show improvement, but also make sure that we're addressing each patient case as its unique situation. I would like to get some final thoughts from the group today now that we've covered our three measures, and at the end, I'll detail where pharmacists and pharmacy team members can find more information. But as we record this podcast today, we are in the middle of July. We're in the dead heat of summer. Where I live, the heat index today is supposed to be at about 109. So I am not going outside if I don't have to. We'll go down the line, and here in the order of Zac, Brittany, and then Cora. For today, let's consider what's your biggest and best recommendation for pharmacies so they can stay cool. That's perhaps not specifically related to temperature. It is outside. Maybe it's about their quality improvement efforts. Maybe it's about how they are gearing up and adjusting for COVID. Maybe it's just about how they can continue to motivate their staff and their patients. So again, we'll go down the line. Zac, you first, then Brittany, and then Cora, you'll close it out.
Thanks, Nick. So I think it's cool. I think about being in the water right now. That's just because where I live is about the same temperature, and so it's going to be pretty wild. But since we are in the heat of summer, I think the thing that we fail to think about sometimes is the fact that right around the corner is going to be a flu season that's predicted to be very, very intense. With everything going on with COVID, obviously, and needing to have the bandwidth and everything to be prepped for that, if and when a vaccine is available. You also need to keep in mind that you have your flu vaccines that are coming up in the next few months, and helping your staff be prepared for that. It's going to be a different year, obviously, a different normal. And so keeping that in mind, and then obviously not forgetting that adherence is still a big focus for reimbursement purposes, for quality improvement purposes. I would just say that those are some of the areas they focus on: immunizations and adherence.
Yeah, thanks for that, Zach. That's really good details and context for us to have. For me, I agree with you, Nick, that, being outside in the heat probably will cause a heat stroke at this point, considering how hot it is. And, I think about pharmacy the same way. If you stay too much in the heat of it, it'll get a little too thick. You may get overwhelmed. So just really kind of understanding your patients in your community, and just understanding what their needs are and finding the best ways to impact them. Of course, with flu season coming up, even just from them simply having to come in the pharmacy to get what they may need, on a month-to-month basis, continuing to do what's going to work for you in order for you to be successful. I've said it before, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but establishing a quality champion in your pharmacy may really assist you and really take a long way. We've talked about it before. We had the blog posts that have been out there about just establishing that one staff member that may be in charge of possibly bringing just some positivity in the pharmacy that may keep you encouraged and really keep you out of, the heat of everything that may seem very thick right now. Everything getting prepared for COVID, so that once things do really pick up and things continue to get, a little bit more intense as the year goes on, and as we continue to watch how different trends and different things may continue to impact the pharmacy, that you are prepared and ready for it. In my opinion, I believe that having that positive mindset can really go a long way. Cora, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are for the summer.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany. And you hit on a lot of the similar points that I had in mind. When I think of summer, I think of fun and being outdoors and all of the exciting things that you can do with friends. And while 2020 has been a year like no other, this is going to be a summer like no other. And many people are not able to go out and do all of those fun things that they're used to doing within the summer months. So my key point here is to maybe take a step back from, the day-to-day life within the pharmacy. And it's been a rough couple of months with COVID and all of the things considered. Maybe just take a step back and have some more fun, encouraging conversations with patients and those that walk in your door, because those people may have been, at home, social distancing, not having as many interactions as they normally would. And so coming into the pharmacy, maybe it would be great to just engage in a normal human conversation, face to face, with 6 foot of distance, of course. But perhaps maybe having those more holistic conversations, not necessarily just directly related to medication, may lend yourself to having more detailed conversations and understanding more information about that patient than you would have gotten otherwise. And so when I think of, going into the summer, all of the preparations must be made for obviously flu season and kind of getting through the end of the year, but maybe it's also good to always just take a step back, really learn about what's going on in your patients' lives, and just have a really great conversation with them on a human level.
Team, I want to thank you all for sharing your thoughts on these 3 new quality measures that are in EQuIPP, and in addition, sharing your thoughts here at the end of the podcast, what pharmacies can do to help beat the heat, be that a literal summer heat or the figurative heat of the daily grind. Pharmacists are the medication experts. That's something that each one of us believes down to our core. And pharmacists are continuing to provide more information in detail about medication use, about effective public health campaigns, and pharmacists are continuing to improve medication use, health and wellness for patients in the communities that they serve. So please keep that up. Absolutely a great resource for patients everywhere. As we close out, I would note for our pharmacists that if you're interested in seeing these new measures in EQuIPP, you may be diving into your EQuIPP dashboard right away to see the information that's there. And I would point out at this point that while these measures are now available for hosting in EQuIPP, there may not be data available for all pharmacies. It will be dependent upon which payers are hosting these new measures in EQuIPP. Still, it is important to learn and understand the details about them. So what does that mean for you? If you have questions about these new measures or any data in EQuIPP, please check out the resources tab in EQuIPP or the FAQ page, or you can contact us via the support link in the bottom right-hand corner of EQuIPP or by email at support@equipp.org. That's all we have for today, folks. We appreciate you listening to another episode of the Quality Corner Show and hope you join us next week for another thrilling episode about quality improvement and medication use. And as always,
our team here at PQS has a couple of favors to ask of you, our podcast listener. First, we encourage you to share this podcast with 2 friends, because if you share this with 2 friends and each of them shares it with 2 friends, it really helps us hit a larger listening audience. Second, we also want to take a moment to remind you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you may find it. And then, if you have any questions or topics you would like us to address, please contact us. The best way to do so is to email info@pharmacyquality.com. Let us know what is on your mind and what we can address so that you are fully informed. Our goal is to continuously improve our podcast content and to provide meaningful information to our listeners based on current topics in healthcare, technology, and quality measurement. We want to help you become as effective as possible in how you care for patients and improve public health outcomes. So until next time, we wish you well.